All right.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming. My name is Cantú. I'm a senior editor at the New Inquiry and journalist, and most recently an organizer, which I think is a seat we find a lot of ourselves in, trying to figure out what the hell we're doing before January 20th, and things most likely change, in ways that we can't really foresee. So we wanted to have this panel today to sort of think about not just encryption, not just digital communications, but how can we sort of change the way that we communicate in a way that is cognizant of living in a repressive environment. And so on this panel we have some folks from Freedom of the Press Foundation, and we have some folks here who have experience communicating for social change in extremely repressive environments that maybe to Americans is something new, but to people all over the world is something a lot more familiar. So I'm quickly going to go around, or we're going to go around and people are going to say their names and who they are, and then we'll begin the discussion. So
Hello everyone, thank you for coming here. My name is Loubna Mrie. I'm a Syrian activist. I currently based in New York. When they told me about this panel, I felt like it's not really fair to compare the situation in the Middle East with the situation in America. I feel like people here people don't disappear if you posted something bad about your government on Facebook, or even if you wrote an article criticizing the president. So hopefully the situation stays the same. But in any case, I don't consider myself an expert. I just want to share my experience with you as an activist who used social media platforms, especially Facebook, to make change in my country. And I really hope this panel to be more as a conversation, and we will open it to the audience so we can all try to brainstorm what the next step in this country should be.
So my name is Ahmed El-Hady. I'm Egyptian. I'm based here in the US because I'm a neuroscientist at Princeton University, studying decision making. And in a parallel universe, I'm an activist, mostly concerned about Egypt, especially queer-related issues in Egypt. And generally, I think a lot about the revolution. I talk about the revolution, and I hope the revolutionary change will happen in Egypt and across the world. I came to the panel because I'm very much interested in and I have been talking about the militarization of technology and the development of new surveillance technologies by both the government and corporations in the United States, and this will come up across in the panel. So,
I'm Harlo Holmes. I'm the director of Newsroom Digital Security at Freedom of the Press Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to 21st century support for 21st century journalists. And what that means is that obviously the playing field has changed drastically. Not only do journalists work with a variety of media that are totally different from what they had been working with 50 years ago, let's say, but also who wears the journalist hat has changed drastically. And so we find ourselves supporting not only typical press members who go to press clubs and work in a big old office somewhere, but also a lot of freelancers, a lot of citizen media, a lot of independent media. And so that said, the threat models that face them are super varied, but all have the common thread of needing advanced protection digitally, legally, and financially. And that's what we're here to serve.
Hello, I am Olivia Norton. I work with Harlo at Freedom of the Press Foundation as a trainer, formerly at NYU's Gallatin School of Visualized Study, studying new media, political philosophy, and economics. Much of our work at Freedom of the Press Foundation centers on bringing digital security tools to journalists as well as other at-risk groups. These are individuals who are instrumental to the work of journalists. And our primary mission is to make those tools and to make those security practices accessible to wide ranges of individuals with different risks associated with the work that they do.
Cool, thanks everybody. So yeah, just one note, so we're going to talk on this panel for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience and to Twitter for an hour. So the first question I had for everybody on the panel was, so it kind of concerns something that a friend of mine told me yesterday. I had lunch with a friend, and he told me that he saw the Arab uprisings of 2011 as a potential inspiration for a movement that could be built here. I know maybe you guys think that's naive, but it got me also thinking about the types of communications repression that happens, or that has happened and continues to happen in Syria and Egypt and elsewhere. So my first question would be, for everybody, what sort of infrastructure already exists in the United States that would allow Trump to embark on extreme oppression that we haven't seen ever? Repression of dissidents, repression of journalists. What's already in place that he can use and build upon to build like a really scary environment?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks, Alan. Everyone hears me? Okay. So we are having this panel now, and it amazes me why now. And we had incidences where when the NSA leaks happened, there was not the same outrage from people or reaction in terms of what do we do next. So it appears to me that only now, because it begins to affect the white middle class, it becomes an issue. So already since the 9/11, the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, there have been very invasive surveillance for communities that are not white. For example, the NYPD surveillance for the Muslim communities in New York, and I personally get a lot of screening before coming to the United States and profiling. But now, because it began to affect the white middle class, so we have the infrastructure is already there. Just its reach might be extended by the Patriot Act, which is still in place of housing. Another example like this, no-fly lists. So there are professors who maybe would go to the airport and they find themselves unable to board a flight because their name is now on the no-fly list. How did they get there? Nobody knows. It's a very obscure case. But it usually affects people of color or minorities. The other thing is the militarization of police. So Obama has passed I think 2 years ago, the National Defense Authorization Act, which gives the military law enforcement duties in case there are suspicion of terrorism. And this is the term terrorist will be now even extended beyond its meaning. So these are the things I personally see as an outsider and a part of a couple of minorities that are targeted, that the infrastructure is already there. It just, it surprises me why the outrage just now.
I think that's interesting it's very, very interesting that you bring up, I guess, the distinction that, for instance, or that perhaps this is a moment of awakening somehow for the white middle class, which I tend to disagree with. Simply because actually within the United States, you can draw certain parallels between what's already going on with the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of surveillance, the groups that are demonstrating at Standing Rock in terms of surveillance, and a number of other groups that have already kind of reaped the benefits of infrastructure that are already in play. So so for instance, as far as Black Lives Matter actually is concerned, there was it's already been known for a number of months that there's been an acceleration in the use of social media networking in order to either track down demonstrators where they are, harass them, intimidate them, and kind of weave through their networks in a very systemic way, even working with open data organizations in order to affect this chilling effect. The chilling effect being the thing that intimidates you so much that you don't want to go outside anymore. And that actually is very, very similar to what we've been seeing in Syria. So for instance, there was an article that came out a couple of days ago talking about how social media, even though it drew great success during 2011, 2012 to 2013 in the various revolutions in the Middle East region, has actually stopped being as effective as it once was because people are starting to, or rather law enforcement agencies and government agencies are starting to adapt that playbook and realize how easily, how easily social media is to suppress and to use against people who organize rather than for people. So it's very, very interesting that, or I guess not what's interesting, but what we all need to kind of take into account is these people are all using the same tools. We're all using the same tools, and we're seeing in America, we're seeing across the pond, we're seeing literally everywhere these tactics being used against us, and it would be a shame if we bifurcated between protesters and the white middle class, because it's all affecting all of us, and we need to kind of wise up to it.
Can I add something? I think it's very understandable why governments are afraid of Facebook. Or can you hear me? Yeah. I guess that it's very understandable why governments are very scared of Facebook today. For example, that you don't need to be a politician to have a movement today in the street. You just do an event, and the next day you see people in demonstrations. Which brings me back to the day after the election, when we saw the big demonstration in Union Square. Lots of people showed up because there was an event on Facebook, which again, it was kind of the same scenario of the 25th of January in Egypt, where the whole situation started because of a Facebook event. So yes, again, it's very understandable. That's why governments tend to block Facebook every time there is kind of a serious movement in the country, which also we saw that in Turkey, for example, at the Gezi Park. Erdogan, the first thing he did was to block Facebook, which forced activists to use apps like Hotspot Shield and I don't know, that was the one that I used.
Hotspot Shield?
Well, yeah. Also, you mentioned something about tracking down activism, or tracking down activists. Yes, as Ahmed said, that after 9/11, the plan in this government was let's find the bad people before they become the bad people, which all started the whole entrapment situation. Which, yes, many of those people today, you see that they are being entrapped on social media, Facebook, Telegram, whatever. But is there any plan to stop this? Do we have a plan to fight back? Do we have a plan for those activists to just like to protect themselves on social media.
And I just want to clarify just one point.
Yeah, no,
No, what I meant not the white middle class separation from the protesters, but the sympathy with demands of the protesters have increased because Black Lives Matter have interacted closely with them either in New York or in Princeton. They were criticized, they were called radicals, but now there is no sympathy with demands. The second thing, I think the comparison is a bit unfair to Syria and Egypt because of the extent of the power of the law enforcement. The Egyptian government has the power to shut down the internet totally during the uprising. I don't think the US government can easily pass such thing to close down totally the internet. You can see the flow of the internet out of Egypt, it went to zero, it closed down totally. We had incidents of academics, like the Italian regime, being kidnapped and found dead on the side. So I think the parallels are unfair because of the power of the law enforcement is very strong.
There would be people who would argue that, in the United States the power of the police is equally as strong. I mean, you could get into arguments of scale, but you definitely do have to be sympathetic to that. That said, not going to compare it because they are, to a certain extent, apples to oranges. Like all of our situations are apples to oranges, and you do like you rightfully do say that when it comes to internet shutdowns and things like that, we have not in the United States seen that to that degree, and it would be a travesty if we ever did. So definitely, I would also just like to say overall that. We need to, going forward, one of the reasons why this panel is so interesting and has a lot of promise and a lot of really, really great stuff to dig into is because there is an inherent danger in comparing these situations. And there is even a little bit perhaps of schadenfreude from other countries that might say oh, well, hey, America, well, we've been going through this for the past, X number of years. And I would like to resist that because the situations are vastly, vastly different, and they're going to devolve in different ways. One of the things that I think is so interesting about that is the way that adversaries are not as naive about the powers of social media. So not only does that mean that they're, they realize that, yeah, well, we can just shut down the internet and boom, that's it. Or we can just filter, this is what happens with the Great Firewall of China. It's it's not necessarily, well, I mean, it is about what you say, but actually it's about, how viral what you say is. So these are lessons that get learned. In the United States, what was the surprising thing that we learned is that, the news is fake. So these are it's always going to be different. And as much as we have similarities, we have a lot of differences.
I think what we're also seeing is this very real conflict between the kind of equalizing force of social media, just in terms of freeing up spaces for expression for organizers, but this comes into direct conflict with the threat of surveillance that we see on social media. We internalize surveillance in a way such that it has a chilling effect on expression. We're afraid to say certain things, and this chilling effect has spread especially to the press, and we know that Trump is a very staunch adversary to the press. On a campaign trail he's called journalist scum. He has mentioned that he is very interested in extending the reach and power of libel laws in the US, and we've seen a number of court cases which have caused the end of certain publications and caused the end of careers of journalists. And this is a real problem because the press and organizers on the ground have a dependent relationship. The organizers depend on the press to garner attention for their movements. So there's this really kind of scary feedback loop where something like social media that we use as a form of getting boots on the ground is also something that could cause the end of a movement or the end of a news organization.
Yeah, so that feeds into my next question. I've been to maybe 2 crypto parties, and the term threat modeling comes up a lot. And threat modeling, well, maybe you guys can define it better than I can. But I guess my question would be, Trump is a wild card in many ways, and so if threat modeling is a way to predict and preempt certain threats, how has the Trump administration, or how have you guys handled threat modeling with the prospect of a Trump administration?
I can start. I've been on this scene for a number of years, a couple of them as a digital security trainer. Usually it's because people have specific questions that, so first off, the basics of threat modeling, there's a number of really, really excellent people. If you'd like to learn more about it, I recommend the works of either Jonathan Stray, who's a great journalist, as well as Ryan Garrity, who gave a fabulous talk the other day at the Glass Room, which is this Mozilla tactical tech thing. Anywho, that said, want to learn threat modeling, consult your local library. But ultimately, it's what assets do you have to protect, and who are your adversaries, and what resources do those adversaries have in order to extract the assets from you, and what will happen to your network if the assets are extracted, and what are you already doing that might possibly put these assets and networks at risk for the adversaries. And this is a lot of jargon, and it's crazy. That doesn't really make sense to people until a couple of weeks ago, when people actually started to ask concrete questions. And this is just what I'm seeing. I'm sure at different times, in the aftermath of different elections or different, political events, these things have bubbled up within, the spheres that we all work in. But people had started to be able to substitute easily what that jargon was for specific things that were in their lives, in their offices, in their phones, and so that actually was really, really elucidating for me, illuminating for me, to go from a conversation with some people, they're like, yeah, I want to learn how to use PGP, to people who are like, I have a mailing list. How do I protect that mailing list? Because I wonder if that will be subpoenaed if they're going to build a registry of Muslims. And so that actually was a little bit of a turning point in terms of people natively coming to understand threat modeling.
Maybe one of you guys can talk about, in your experience in the Middle East, Egypt or Syria, how did you preempt different ways that you knew you were going to be surveilled or that you knew that you were being watched? How did you attempt to circumvent those methods?
On social media, for example, it is always a smart idea to use a nickname or just use proxy apps. And we have something, I don't know if it exists in this country, but sometimes there's certain words that you cannot really type because it will bring more attention to your conversation. So actually, we tended to use fake words when we want to refer for a demonstration or a gathering, etc. I don't think maybe I'm lying, but I don't think the situation is that bad, so people should start using fake names. But if the situation got worse, this is what will help.
Well, there is, if people have seen any news about Geopedia, which was a company that made software to geo-track Twitter, Facebook, social media posts based on keywords. Well, partially based on keywords, also based on location. So I think, we're not too far.
Yeah, just like that, like a proxy app, like Hotspot Shield, it changes your IP every half an hour. So I think this is a great.
Yeah, I will build just on the point of tracking. So if you check the company called Cambridge Analytica, which the Trump campaign have used, and it have built a psychological profile for almost 2.2 million people.
What is it called?
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge Analytica.
That the Trump campaign have used to track, to profile people psychologically, what they eat, what their habits on social media, and they get targeted ads. Related to this is the fake news issue. You can check an article by a guy called Jonathan Albright. He mapped the whole ecosystem of the fake news, and they use Facebook as an amplification device. So if you check one of these fake news websites, you get ads from them on Facebook, and then if you share it, other people share it, and then it amplifies yourself. Steve Bannon is on the board of Cambridge Analytica, so that's another information to know. So here it puts a challenge to the threat modeling of it, is that we don't know how powerful the enemy is. I would name them here. Part of it is that for example, the fake news were so successful, or the right-wing propaganda is so successful that if you write on Google are Muslims, and the autocomplete is terrorists, and if you write are Jews, the autocomplete is horrifying. And the first results are either Islamophobic or anti-Semitic propaganda. And if you go to Google, tell them reveal your algorithms, it's a black box. So we are here we are dealing with in a device that we don't know how it works. The search engine, we have some idea how the search engines work, but Google and Facebook have not done the homework well in terms of this fake news. So this puts a lot of challenge onto the threat model.
Yeah, I mean, I think to expand that, I think we're seeing this change. People are rapidly adopting new communications tools that supply end-to-end encryption and are more secure platforms. But we also have some very severe misconceptions that we need to address. Namely, that the general public doesn't necessarily understand what encryption is, what circumvention tools are, and even when you say this is a secure platform, people don't tend to believe you. We have a lot of issues with, for example, if the user experience of a tool is good, it inherently means that it's insecure. We also are worried about surveillance, but don't necessarily believe people when they say that your threat actor cannot intercept your communications, and so I think in what we face moving forward is how do we bring this conversation to a level and use language that is accessible to people, so that we can really continue to organize securely and in a way that people aren't afraid to continue their work.
I think of this like, if you normalizing encryption, because everything is hackable by construction. It's just if a large number of people use it, then it becomes harder and harder for a third party or a government or corporation to crack into it. So normalizing encryption, but this will
call into what Olivia said, is that making it more accessible to the language and the speech.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue into my next question, which is not just how do you build a culture of encryption, but I think normally we think of encryption as something digital, as something you do on a computer. So culture of encryption, offline as well as online. How do you begin to build something like this or develop it?
I'm a big fan of noisy bars. I don't know.
What's that?
Oh man, if you want to tell someone a secret, go to a bar. Yeah. Also, I think, well, what it harkens to is the idea that just remembering that even though, you know, we have phones literally right out here on the table, always within line of sight pretty much, that there are parts of our lives that don't belong on it, that don't belong on the internet, that don't belong in earshot of this device. And actually, like, journalists have a very, very keen knowledge of that already. They really, really do. So there are certain parts where I feel a little bit ashamed and definitely in awe when I try to teach people about digital security, because ultimately, like, their lives are made so much more complicated by the digital that they have to, you know, they have to embrace all the time.
I go to the point of the physical encryption.
Yeah.
You know, with the right, you know, with Trump administration coming, we have some voices asking that they revive against the Committee of Un-American Activities. And there is a website called professorwatchlist.org. You can see a list of leftist professors there, because they said in a lecture something that is against the free market. So this gives the, you know, would you use coded language? Like, you know, from my experience as here in Egypt, we use coded language in our communities because it's a, you know, the minorities as said. So we use an Arabic language with some, you know, vocabulary that is different from the language that straight or heterosexuals will understand. But if I'm giving a lecture, should I like encrypt my lecture, and whom do I have in the audience who is watching me, who will be on this list, and what are the consequences? If you are, you know, people who are getting more and more nationalistic, if you are outside, how you should begin to be hyper vigilant. Like you said, in noisy bars, so that you don't have informants around you, which is the case with something that we face in Egypt, for example. But I find this watch list and shaming online is very something completely threatening to free speech.
Another thing that I wanted to mention, and this isn't necessarily, I mean, it is also digital, and I don't know necessarily if the question means that physical is the opposite of digital, so I'm presuming it's not. But, you know, there is a certain thing to community and to community resilience. A number of years ago, I think it was 2013, don't quote me on it, but a group that offered mesh networking to neighborhoods in Brooklyn, both in times of crisis, like Hurricane Sandy, but also in, you know, just as a co-op model. Those things can happen in certain neighborhoods, and this was happening in Brooklyn, where we are. Those things would happen in certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn because they were community that were invested enough to stay around to maintain the infrastructure, to learn how the software and the protocols work enough to troubleshoot for their neighbors. But those things won't work in, like, you know, like freaking Williamsburg, because, like, nobody actually lives in Williamsburg, only Airbnb people live in Williamsburg, you know? So there is a certain amount of resilience that needs to be relearned in order, and cherished in order for, like, physical encryption to happen.
Yeah, to harken back to the notion of culture of encryption, I think in our communities, when we're discussing encryption, we need to take into account the dependent nature between our physical security, our digital security, as well as our emotional and psychosocial well-being. It's one, they can't, to be effective organizers and journalists and creatives, we cannot just teach digital security and not discuss the need for being hyper-vigilant physically. So these are all conversations that we need to foster and that we need to have on a wider basis. And this includes some really serious kind of community building between what used to seem as disparate communities, but are now, we're realizing that we're all really dependent on one another, especially as we move into a Trump regime.
I would just build on the type of data, the digital data that is being gathered now. I think, with the rise of face recognition and advanced face recognition algorithms, there are even emotional analytics now. You can infer people's emotions from some of the images. You have the extreme example of China. I just read they want to have a social credit number score for every citizen based on their big data. So we have to take into account not only the communication, but the type of data that is being gathered about us, and how then the encryption side will be advancing in even protecting more and more data that is becoming that is being used.
Just to go back to the point that you had mentioned about community building, that's something that I've noticed since the election. There's been a lot of meetings, there've been a lot of gatherings. I've seen a lot of my friends more often in 1 month than I did, in the year before. And it seems like people have an intuitive sense that to survive and possibly thrive through what's coming, those sorts of social bonds need to be developed and need to be strong. And you have to have people that you can trust in potential times of crises. So I was wondering, maybe Loubna can start us off. How do you build and sustain those kinds of social bonds in an environment of repression, an environment of where you're threatened, but where you're also attempting to instigate social change?
Okay, so you first started with that you were meeting lots of your friends.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that change in this country requires more than just sit together and talk about the current situation. I noticed that, yes, lots of people are meeting, lots of people are talking, but is there a plan? Or is just people trying to do something? What is the next step? Where do we go from here? As an immigrant in this country, Muslim by birth, as a Syrian, what is the plan for someone like me if Homeland Security at some point in a year, for example, they came to my doorstep and be like, you're out. Is there any plan for people like us? And this is what the people here should think about. Okay, you are meeting, you're putting lots of energy in this, but you have to have a plan. Meeting is not enough, at least.
Could meeting and I mean even just right now, because I think there's a lot of isolation in our culture. I mean, meeting your neighbors or meeting people in order to develop the trust that is needed for developing a more profound long-term plan. I wonder if that's maybe one of the purposes that people are gathering right now.
Yeah. And something that I'm really interested in, and I think this touches on your point, is combating burnout rates in our communities. Having a set action plan is really important, and having those actions be durable and long-term and constructive. Something that's really important when mapping out those long-term goals is making sure that we're present emotionally and physically for them. So having frank conversations with our friends and our collaborators about self-care and I guess knowing where your limits are and checking in on that and not being shy to say that you need to step out and coming back and coming back with full force, I think is something really important in our communities.
Yeah, and I think it again goes back into the point that Loubna just raised is priorities. What do we want to do if there is a movement now? Is it only about combating Trump, or there is a much more including danger that we have to combat? Why we have to ask ourselves very fundamental questions. Why is the extreme rise, the rise of the far right again? I don't know if it's the term, the far right again rising. We have to ask ourselves very fundamental questions in order to have concrete action plans. Because I sympathize very strongly with the Occupy Wall Street movement, but we want to oppose the system. We want to bring down the system. But what is the system and how we bring it down? That's a question that is still unanswered. And we need to think a bit before. And this is building communities. The communities have to. The problem that's happening with capitalism now, the way the precarious life we are living is that it's stripping us from the capability to imagine. You can imagine everything, new technologies, but you cannot imagine end of capitalism or neoliberalism. So we have to, be more ambitious if we want to do, and how we can think about, a concrete action plan, how to get on this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's just develop that point. I like the idea of imagining, I think a Trump administration was something, 2 months ago was something unimaginable, or it was something that was the stuff of nightmares. I mean, no one really took it seriously. And now he's the president-elect. And to me, the sort of lesson was like, well, maybe you should imagine, the worst possible thing that can happen in order for it to not happen. Maybe we can take it from there. What are some things that we imagine directions that we imagine the administration going in? Because personally, I'm not so interested in conversations that are about, it's not going to be so bad, or maybe he'll moderate or whatever. No, I want to think, what is the worst possible thing that can happen, and how can we ensure things don't end up that way?
Oh, the second part of your question is a hell of a lot more difficult than the first, definitely. And also coming about with a satisfactory answer to the second part of your question is going to take all of our work, and it's going to take a lot of vigilance. From my perspective, though, to answer the first part of your question, I would like to talk, and stay tuned for the crypto party, because we'll talk more about this, or at least I will, is about the changes to Rule 41, which passed a couple of days ago. Rule 41 being the statute that allows government agencies to pretty much hack into computers of suspects of crimes. And this is a very, very contentious, I'll save all of it for the crypto party, I'm sorry, let me give this the short shrift. Okay, so it's contentious, the legal hacking thing is very, very contentious, but the expansion to Rule 41 that just passed means that it gets rid of the jurisdiction clause. So sometimes there's a criminal whose computer is, let's say, behind a VPN or Tor, so you don't really know where that criminal is. So doesn't that make sense that you can just get any old judge anywhere to rule on whether or not you hacked this computer? And so getting rid of the physical boundaries actually has its digital correlate, which means that if I'm hanging out at the Marriott and I don't trust the Wi-Fi there and I fire up my VPN, then I could get hacked for some reason. I'm super duper condensing the steps obviously, but this is open up to abuse. And so what I worry about the thing that I worry about the most is actually the judges that are going to be installed. Because Rule 41 has actually been on the books for a while. We voted, well, not me, but people voted on it a couple of days ago, and they voted on it years back. And that did not happen under a Trump administration, that happened under an Obama administration. And why that's interesting is that the change in regime has gotten to the point where, like, judges will be installed that propagate the kind of like slimy undercurrents that we're starting to see. And that is what we really, really need to worry about. And I wonder if they'll just rule on any old thing.
Anyone else? And this will be our last question, and then we'll turn to Q&A.
The worst case scenario, I was just, for the worst case scenario, I just tortured myself a bit by watching a lot of the people who endorsed him from the far right. I was from the far right, to see what type of agenda they want. So these are a group of people who don't believe in equality. So they are very close to, if somebody is familiar with something called the Dark Enlightenment ideas from Nick Land and co. And they would try to push for, they believe in a European country, is an ethno, a pure country, and, as I will build a bit, it will be used, it can be done legally by installing judges or completely disrupting the legal system in order to put this in place. I think that's the worst thing that can happen, is to push the agenda of the far right into a state that doesn't, into a truly fascist than ethnic state. That I think is the worst case scenario. At least for me, of somebody who is an immigrant, who is of color, who comes from a Muslim background, who is gay, I don't have a place in this white utopia.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys. I think at this point, it's much more interesting. I think we all have tons of questions. So we're going to open up the mic. Please feel free to come up. And if you're watching the live stream, ask us a question. And I think the hashtag is encrypt to resist with the number 2. So at this point, before the crypto party, we just open up to questions. So if anyone has something to ask, please come to the mic.
Hi. My question is about applying direct action tactics to this topic of surveillance, because obviously with every topic, there's different methods that are more effective for direct action. And I think that we've seen with people talking about, I've seen almost this creepy fantasizing among white liberals of oh, there's a Muslim registry, I'll totally sign up, and that's not going to be effective at all. So what are actually effective ways to leverage privilege, since we know vulnerable communities will still be most effective in direct actions to combat that?
So how to leverage privilege in direct actions? Anybody have any?
I'm the wrong person to answer
Yeah,
that
I'm not
question, as a person whose actions are usually pretty indirect, and also someone who has no privilege.
Right. Yeah, not totally sure if we have some answers to that. I think as far as how to leverage privilege, I think that's an ongoing conversation, but you want to?
Yeah, I think. I don't know what you exactly meant by direct action, but you can definitely leverage.
I can answer it.
Sure.
I mean specifically, what kind of direct actions can we do dealing with surveillance and data, because they occur online and it's a little bit more difficult to do a physical action to or not.
Sure.
But
I think it's back to the normalizing encryption, the concept of encryption. This is the action you should do. People should learn how to encrypt stuff, and most people of privilege can learn how to encrypt. And if we have a lot of people massively encrypting the data, this will make it harder and harder.
Hi, great panel. I have kind of two questions. One thing that didn't get mentioned is how the internet, how there's this big campaign to keep it free, and how maybe what can happen like just by a swift little like signature that the corporate media gets the only attention. And granted, we're using like Google and the Facebook platforms, but so I was wondering like if there's something that we can think ahead about. You mentioned mesh networks, so I hope that question is kind of clear. And then the other thing is, I started an organization or whatever, a group of us, and when we were doing imagery, a little bit of it was a little bit like alarming. So how, in this age of like endless like alarm, how can we be talking about this in a way, that is approachable and actually spreads the message?
First off, I'd like to commend you on your work pushing back on a lot of the privacy issues in the linked NYC, kiosks that we see around. And New York City is not the only city. There's a whole bunch of other cities across the nation that are totally down with the smart kiosks. And the most healthy and like democratic thing, like really like applause, thing you can do is to push back on the involuntary data acquisition that's been going on with initiatives such as these. So thank you very, very, very much.
So, I'm sorry, you talk about Twitter. I'll make my way over there.
Hi. Great panel.
Thank you.
My name is Emil. So after listening to you guys talk, I know there's a lot of tools that people have access to, but they may not know that they have access to use. But my question is more so about how do you get to educate people and encourage them to use the political infrastructure that's already in place in the United States for their benefits and to achieve their goals, whether it be encryption or more political or more policy goals at large. And also, how do you encourage them then after educating them to actually use them, given the fact that 40% of the population didn't really participate in the last election, and the number of millennial voters also decreased compared to the 2012 election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, thank you.
At least for me, like I'm not American, and I know a lot of laws that can, help me. And I think this came from interaction with lawyers or activists, and I think we should spread more what kind of tools can be used to protect oneself now. Especially we need a lot of lawyers not to become organizers and activists in order to help us understand what's happening to the legal system, because this is where the fight will be. From reporting integration till arrests based on surveillance data.
Looking around the room and seeing that the majority of those here are way younger than I am, I'm encouraged to see this type of response. But I just have a sort of a thought about not forgetting the previous two generations. This is not a new fight. This is not a new circumstance. It's new to you guys, because thank goodness it's the first time maybe to many of you who have had to be in the United States. I'm an adopted American, and who have been here face to face, even though it's been around. It's not all of a sudden this thing is done. So having survived, and coming from two families on both sides of my family who survived both extreme right-wing and extreme left-wing totalitarianism, feudalism, all the isms that you can contrive. At the end of the day, what helped people survive and carry on was on a very personal level. Was prior to the internet, So let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I know your comfort zone, but to most young people is communicating online and all that. That there are many other strategies that, so hopefully the next time the room will have a few more 60-plus somethings like me, and to share what people did and how people survived and what was successful, what wasn't successful, so that it's not starting with a blank slate. Because, and you know, there's many stories out there, there are many reasons, and at the end of the day, the left extreme and the right extreme shake hands behind the curtain. Remember that. They're not different at all.
Well, I mean, fortunately, we're having a panel on intergenerational, exactly what you're asking for. It's going to be happening next weekend. Because I totally agree. I mean, there's so much that we have to learn from those who came before. And
Just one little comment. This is not, even though it's made to look like, it's misogynist, it's against Muslims, it's against this. It is against the 90% of the people of this earth, no matter what they look like, no matter whether they're male, female, whatever other identification. It's about democracy in its best sense and about independence of every human being to seek there. That's what it is. It's someone who thinks that a small group of people who think that they should have control over most of the earth. You, me, and anywhere on this earth. Thank you.
No, I will just second your comment on the intergenerational discussion. As you can see from my t-shirt, we had a meeting with organizers from ACT UP, again, the ones who were involved in the LGBT before, because they had tactics to deal in extremely homophobic environment.
I have a quick related question.
Sure.
We know that with all kinds of organizing, demographics really matters. And we organize with people that we can relate to, whether they're in the same age group or other kinds of groupings. And I was just wondering, the activists on the panel, whether you could talk a little bit about how demographics have played into your work and how you've tried to organize and amplify impact through groups of people who know each other and kind of reach beyond them.
I think the most memorable for me was in Tahrir Square in Egypt, because I met people I never met before. So it was a moment of a revolutionary solidarity, because we were all in the square, everyone was protesting, and it was across demographics, across social class. But this was a very particular moment, and I think we are not in a similar moment here, but in a moment where there is a crisis that will unite people from different backgrounds, identities, and we should reach out beyond our circles. But it will happen, because the crisis is against everyone except the Trump and his collaborators.
Earlier in the panel, you were talking about organizations or tools that are already in place to oppress people, and it was, of course, the U.S. government doesn't shut down the internet right now, but I was living in San Francisco in the early days of Black Lives Matter, when it was very focused around the killing of Oscar Grant in a BART station, and a lot of the protests were happening in BART stations, and the San Francisco Police Department would scramble or shut down cellular service, so communication was impossible in or out, which I'm sure you dealt with in Egypt and Syria, and I was wondering what strategies or solutions for getting information in or out when mobile technology isn't available are.
So we used to use satellite internet. I know that you can use it in this country, and it's a lot safer because it's not that surveillance. This is the only thing actually I can think about.
And it also happened in Egypt, so you can use the ground telephone lines, which is still in Egypt. They cannot cut it off because they will cut their own communication, the military and the police. So when they shut it out, the internet. So
yeah, what is the ability of the government to just whether it's local police or state forces or the national government to either cut the internet or to scramble phone lines or local networks? Could you guys briefly describe the capability of these institutions?
From what we know, there has been, like a vast push to militarize certain police forces, and they have received, a certain number of technologies that are usually used in battlefields against their own people. One of the most effective right now that we see is, of course, the Stingray or the INSI catcher or the cell site simulators that disrupt cell phone service either to man in the middle of them, primarily to man in the middle of them, which means forcing all cell phones in the area to connect directly to these false cell towers masquerading as those of your carrier. And then passing that traffic on either onto the intended cell phone tower after it's been intercepted, or not passing it on at all. And so what's interesting about that is that has the unintended effect that there's no way to kind of have discretion over which phones are targeted by those things. So if you're in the area of a cell site simulator, your phone is going to be affected by that cell site simulator. So if you want to, for a very legitimate reason, call 911, for instance, then that phone call is going to be tampered with and maybe not even get through at all. One thing that I find especially interesting about that is that, within our government, there are guidelines about dangers to cell phone use that NIST puts out. Not only cell phone use, but all internet, usage, dangers to internet usage and possible mitigations and things like that. And the cell phone site simulator is in that document, and yet it's still used on people.
I will just build on one more point is that what allows the government in Egypt to continue using this is we have a declared state of emergency that seems endless. So one important legal tool that is the hand of the state is to declare arbitrary state of emergency. And, in Egypt, it's almost a permanent state of emergency, and this is one legal tool that you can just declare it and it remains in place, which gives the state a lot of power. We have seen example in France. The state of emergency is still declared till now after the Paris attack, as far as I know. And it doesn't seem that the upcoming government will remove it. In UK, when the United Kingdom riots happened, they also declared the state of emergency. They even threatened to block Twitter. So, and we have to take care also. The legal topic comes again is that the hand of the state, it has its own hand to declare the state of emergency based on assent.
Right, and well, just to build off that, I mean, we saw a state of emergency declared basically anywhere that there were, demonstration/riot type situations. I think in Milwaukee, Charlotte, those places. Yeah, I mean that's all I'll say. It's just I think state of emergency is something to watch. It seems like it's something that's on the rise, not just here but elsewhere. You can ask the question.
Oh, okay.
Good evening, everyone. I have an observation or two, more than a question. I want to remind you that words mean whatever you wish them to mean. That's quoting Alice in Wonderland, that maybe everybody knows here. And it comes in many different forms. One of the chief coded messages for World War II for the invasion of Normandy was a weather report. Okay, and everybody who needed to know knew what it meant. I also want to second a previous speaker was talking about 1%, 99%. Everybody knows what that means. Even my parents, if they were alive, would know what that means. You use that, and it resonates. And I'll leave you with a further thought, because I've heard reference to the Trump regime, and I'm thinking, Donald, what's the most famous Donald in the world? Donald Duck. And what is his What is his brother's name? Scrooge McDuck. You could conduct a whole criticism just using Disney, our friendly Disney, and mean exactly the opposite. The same way as spring foliage means some things to certain people and other things to others. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there's actually, that's a really cool thing to say, so thank you.
Thanks a lot.
In terms of language, actually, there's an acclaimed linguist, Don McWhorter, who I normally kind of disagree with because he's a little bit too conservativo for me. But, you know, like, I have to give him credit. He's a very talented linguist, and he did mention something that I thought was worth noting, which is pushing the press, let's make a note of it, to be discerning in how they label things. So not to be polite, but to be as precise as possible, because we live in an era where facts don't matter to some people, and where the labels that we would like toss at people literally are, like rolling off people's backs to a point where it's not absorbing in, and people aren't necessarily understanding why we're so displeased. And so, I kind of recommend thinking about language when we advocate for all of these things.
I wanted to refer to like the previous question about like the worst case scenarios that you could envision, and also just in terms of the idea of like what the government can do. And so, just I'm not sure if that I didn't hear your answer like that in terms of that the government shutting down the internet, but yeah, in the case of like martial law, for example, I'd love to know like what like legally the government is capable of doing, either through the military or just through the law as it stands. That's one thing. And then I just wanted to, a different question was just to keep in mind, and just to kind of brainstorm about ways. I mean, one thing you see going back to Occupy, going back to the anti-nuclear movement, is a lack of success at kind of gathering and reaching out to working class people, people of color, people in the non-San Francisco, New York, LA nexus, and that's key. That's like so key to reach people in Kansas and Alabama, and people who aren't like super savvy with internet and Facebook and social media and are on Instagram, and especially journalists in those communities, and how to kind of give them resources and how to kind of bring them together and help them use encrypted communications if they need to, just to kind of brainstorm about that.
Yeah. That's something that's actually really near and dear to our mission at Freedom of the Press Foundation, and not only with us, but like also like the trainer community as a whole. Primarily, we're thinking in the United States, but also internationally. It's a little bit disappointing when you get the call and it's like, oh, can you come out to like Kentucky or whatever, and you're like, gosh, like they should have their own. And so ultimately, like training of trainers in order to understand what like the state of the art is, what like the critical issues in encryption are, and like why certain tools are best for X, Y, Z, is super duper important. And that is what we are trying to build as well, with the help of others, some of which are in this room. Hello, guys. To build a network of trainers who are capable of supporting the freedom of the press everywhere in this country.
I think also to that point is focusing on journalism students as well. So the next generation of journalists, we have mounting distrust of the media in the U.S. is at an all-time high, and it really rests upon the shoulders of the students who are studying journalism. I mean, you don't need to really go to day school to become a journalist, but these are the people that we really also hope to reach as well. And they're going to school in not necessarily in New York or LA, and these are also individuals who I think are becoming more and more radicalized and active and would share what they learned with their networks. And this is kind of harkening back to the training of trainers as well.
Let me just, I mean, if there's anyone watching on the live stream and you live in Middle America and you feel like this pertains to you, please ask a question. We would love to run it.
And also let us know if we're like totally ignorant in our, like New York-based silo where we already have like really dope digital security. Actually, we're fine. So in case keep testing stuff.
Back to your question on organizing across working class, people of color, and I think that Black Justice Platform now is giving a great example of organizing across different identities, going beyond very particular identity politics. And I will quote Angela Davis, who said, who was recently in Princeton, said that any upcoming insurrection of movement will be led by Black queers. And that's very important, I think, because they can galvanize more and more white people to solidarity with them.
I wonder if we become a movement that is fully encrypted and the far right somehow adopt our tactics and make it hard for us to dox them and protect ourselves against them.
Oh, well, I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways. Encryption is not, okay, so I would start out by saying that encryption is, incredibly open source, meaning anyone can adapt it. And, for example, the tensions between, having a mythical backdoor into the iPhone, for instance, is one, there's never going to be, a strategy that's entirely open that doesn't serve everyone. And it's perfectly okay for everyone to understand encryption. That's not even the point. But in terms of, I do think that it's incredibly important for members of, when we're talking about, the email addresses that my organization holds on to because we're an activist group that, is catered to a certain thing. It's incredibly important for those people to understand why encryption is important. And I mean, that goes for everybody. I couldn't honestly say that that's a type of encryption that is only important for, left-leaning activist groups and not for everyone, because that would be incredibly dishonest. And that's just kind of the way it goes. But, you fight the people that you don't like on other battles.
I'm just saying that the fight, if you want to fight them, not through encryption, that, they mastered the art of propaganda. I think it's about time that the left adopt our own propaganda. And that's very important because if you search, right-wing website becomes an authoritative source about Muslims, about Jews, about minorities, and we are involved in sometimes useless discussions. So we can have, no, sometimes, but we can adopt a bit more propaganda in order to fight them because, the internet becomes a battleground. Even organizations like Verso is using it for recruiting people. So I think it's a battleground that we have to adopt. This doesn't mean that you spread fake news, but you should be very on the offense. I think we have been only reactionary. The encryption is, it's good, but we need to pull on the offense.
And being less naive about how these algorithms work, that is one of the several wake-up calls that we're having. Yep.
For the algorithms, I would recommend a book by Katie O'Neill. It's called Weapons of Mass as Mathematics Destructions. I think it removes the naivety about algorithms. Algorithms are neutral in themselves, but they are built within a certain institution instructions and they are used for a particular target. So we should not be naive about algorithms, and we will need to have, in the future, how this can be legally regulated. We need algorithmic accountability. It's a whole discussion like that.
So we were talking about threat modeling, and I feel like in order to do better threat modeling, I'm trying to understand more what the threats are right now. So specifically, I'm thinking with our phones, with our cameras and our microphones. We were very surprised with the soda leaks how much surveillance was being done. I'm curious what we know now about what is possible in terms of hacking into microphones and cameras and phones, and what's being done right
now. Okay, so good news and bad news. One is that a rooted phone will never tell you the truth. So, especially, not necessarily one that you rooted yourself, because that's an awesome power to take, and if you so want to, you should. But a phone that has, been the target of malware that then roots your phone will never tell you the truth. You might as well just throw it away. And so what that means is you can never be sure that any of, the sensors, the microphones, the cameras or whatever are actually turned off and not surreptitiously doing stuff behind your back. For a phone that, for a regular phone, which I mean, and that this is like a weird proposition because how do I prove that my phone isn't totally destroyed? It's very, very hard to do unless you know forensic people in forensics. Well, actually, maybe something is that Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatever would work. I don't know because they're anti-root. But anyways, that's a total. I don't know.
What's root?
Root means that, okay, so usually your phones, unlike your computers, your phones usually do not allow regular users in order to perform super user functions. You're only allowed access to you as a user are only allowed access to certain number of processes. And what that means is that it keeps us from kind of destroying our phones. It also keeps other apps from destroying one another. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a malicious thing. It could be a super, capitalist competitive thing where Uber doesn't want Lyft to run. So they'll, mess up how Lyft is running or vice versa. So these are processes that applications that you run, or these are services that applications that you run don't have access to under normal circumstances. And if your phone is healthy, then that ecosystem is maintained. But you see a number of people who have been targeted by malware every once in a while. Someone learns how to root the iPhone via a malicious link that somebody downloads because they clicked on a link that was sent to them in a text message that says oh, here's a picture of your wife cheating on you or something, and oh, gotta click that. Spear phishing. So these are one way that zero-day exploits, unknown exploits in the wild, jump onto phones and root them, turn them into surveillance machines that log everything that you do, that take pictures, that record your calls, and send them to a home base that either wants to incriminate you, to embarrass you, or to understand who you're talking to. So yeah, that's how that works. What was the question?
It was about threat modeling.
Yeah, threat modeling.
Yeah.
How to stop that from happening. So anything is possible, and the thing about the exploit ecosystem is that there are financial incentives for people to pursue these exploits. There's two different types. This is actually really interesting. There's two. It's kind of like that Mad Magazine comic, Spy versus Spy, where there's the black hat spy and the white hat spy. I hate those, by men. But there you go. One type of exploit hunter will sell these exploits on the black market to the highest bidder, and maybe that's a criminal organization, maybe that's a corporate power that wants to totally destroy their competitor, maybe that's a government that wants to mess with activists and dissidents, right? On the other hand, then there's the people who discover these vulnerabilities and say like, knock knock, hey Google, we found this, and Google will pay what's called a bug bounty in response. And so unfortunately, like this ecosystem is a little bit weighted towards, you know, the more like kind of sneaky market because it pays more, obviously, because offense is usually more lucrative than defense. That said, for normal people, I mean, like the adage goes, if your adversary is a 3-letter agency, then like, you know, I don't know what to tell you, especially not on the record, right? But for normal people, though, having understanding what phishing looks like and understanding exactly like why someone might phish you. So, for instance, I do, like, you know, every once in a while I do get phished, and it's usually like taking advantage of the fact that like I'll respond to your email honestly, you know, like understanding that that's a little bit of that's a lure that you have. Understanding that like you might work for a company or an organization that is interesting because your emails might reveal information about who funds your organization. Understanding that that is like something that people are on the lookout for will help you kind of identify where those are coming. Luckily, there aren't too many 0 days that just happen for no reason. Usually, they are the product of phishing attacks and things like that. The other thing is to know that it's most likely for normal people to be impersonated. So this is why verification is like super duper important. Understanding that like the reason why Signal has safety numbers is because you're actually supposed to use them to make sure that you're talking to the person that you're talking to. Understanding that like, you know, the Verizons and the like T-Mobiles and the AT&Ts of the world are really, really bad at somebody walking in with a fake ID of you and saying like, give me, you know, like your give me your SIM card. I'm like, you know, Joey B. Because that's a social engineering attack that leads to SIM jacking, which means that like now all of your communications are routed through this other number owned by a person that you don't know. It's kind of a diatribe here, but that's kind of the mobile ecosystem. There's more stuff, but
should I get rid of my iPhone and get like a more traditional burner phone or something? Like that's I feel like a question maybe a lot.
No. Okay, so this is the thing. There was actually an article a couple of weeks ago about how a certain number. Okay, so this is actually really interesting. A certain number of phones made by a number of manufacturers that are like less pricey. Either mid-price phones that you would see in the unlocked section of, you know, Best Buy, or in like, you know, kind of like really awesome stores like Cowboy, which is on 27th and 6th Avenue, which like sells all these like off-brand products and stuff like that. Like these are, they actually have like incomplete and often dangerous and backdoored version of the Android operating system. And so what that means is that, you know, for a variety of reasons, we can't necessarily say why, but there have been phones that have been on the market for a number of years that literally have the capability of just like totally doing all of those scary things that I just described. And what's interesting about that is that those phones are typically marketed to, you know, like to immigrant communities. They're marketed towards people in you know, like lower income stratuses. And that's like, that right there just like kind of crystallizes how, you know, encryption is something that, or security even is something that like rich people enjoy and other people do not. And that's scary. That's really, really scary and unfair. But if you have the means to get a burner, like get a good burner. Hey, so
That's a good burner phone.
like another iPhone. Yeah, something that ultimately like something that runs the operating system as it's meant to be run.
Does that mean you shouldn't root your own phone? Sorry, that's a tangent.
Oh, you definitely, if you know what you're doing, you should definitely root your own phone. I would like to give a shout out to the Copperhead system, or the Copperhead OS, which is like, it's like new and it's starting to get bigger and stronger and more awesome. Is a custom ROM for Android, but it's for like high-end phones. So like, the Nexus 5X and up. That has security in mind. And actually, if you are going to root your phone, that's what you should root it with. Yeah. But keep in mind also, like rooted phones come with certain disadvantages. So like obviously, certain, of course, like there's no root ecosystem for iPhone, so this really just talks about Android. But the Android ecosystem, like you are locked out of like certain Google things, and like that's perfectly okay. That's totally fine. But it does. You have to be vigilant because it would change the security model of a lot of end-to-end encryption software that you would rely on. As long as you are capable of managing that, and actually Copperhead makes it relatively easy to do that, then go for it.
Just 1 second. So we have about 6 minutes. So if you had a question and you're feeling shy, please come up and ask it. And then we'll take a break for about 15 minutes, and then we'll start the crypto class.
So sorry, what I was actually going to ask is sort of tangentially related. So you were talking earlier about Facebook being used as a central area for organizing, which is obviously great, but also now we're having issues with where Facebook is not necessarily doing kind of the due diligence to make sure that it's a safe place for everyone to use. And the same thing is for, when all of our technology, our activist technology revolves around proprietary companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google, is there a point at which we need to start building our own infrastructures, or do you have any advice on how to deal with that in general?
Maybe Loubna.
Yeah, I think here for the Facebook issue is different because, for example, the Syrian government was not really capable of going to the Facebook guy, be like, hey, can you please tell me who is the person behind this profile or this account? But I feel like maybe this is something more accessible for the American government, like they can actually access that. And as Ahmed said that, because ISIS today uses Telegram or Facebook or Twitter as a recruiting tool, this gave the justification for the American government actually to go after certain Facebook accounts, and sometimes they shut them down, or even they are able to serve it. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, no, just go for the bad guys. But the thing here is that, yes, basically they kind of have the justification to go after certain people, and I think they were able to do that.
And so, have either of you guys would like to speak to experience building communications infrastructure outside of, as was mentioned, proprietary
flyers? Like the first calls for the Syrian uprising were flyers; they were not Facebook events. Because the first movement of the protest, they were not actually targeting, I don't want to call them the privileged, but not everyone in Syria had Facebook. So the flyers was a very effective way to get all kinds of people involved in this.
Yeah, I would second this. In Egypt, Facebook events gather people in Cairo, in the capital, but people in other places other than Cairo, which was very critical for the uprising. For example, in Suez, around the Suez Canal, it was word of mouth and paper, because paper is still the safest way. You have an ultra-secret thing, you just use the paper, and if you want, you can just burn it. It's still the safest way to communicate word of mouth. In terms of bringing up this point, we should not forget that these are companies, and companies are bound to make profit. So what made part of the reason the fake news problem was exaggerated is advertising method. So in order to make money. So we should not forget that corporations, there is diaspora, but they were under extreme pressure that one of the co-founders committed suicide. So you have to make sure that this is not, you have to be aware that this is an uphill fight. That to have a competitor, even a small competitor like WhatsApp was already acquired by Facebook. So it's an uphill fight definitely. You should build an alternative communication network, but it has its own price.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So fake news isn't new online. We've been dealing with economically motivated political clickbait for years, but this is the first time we've seen it kind of weaponized as a political tool, at least online and at this scale. But here, at least in the US, we haven't seen propaganda spread virally on social media produced by the state, arguably. I was wondering if our speakers have encountered state-sponsored fake news in times of social unrest, and if you could describe its impact and maybe share strategies of identification or counter-speech. Thank you.
In Egypt, definitely the government is very good at spreading fake news about shortage of, especially in the time before the coup d'etat in 2013, before Sisi removed the elected government. There was, wide spread of fake news about shortage of some. The issue is it's very hard to contract it because it's ideologically motivated, and people who believe it or disbelieve it based on ideology. And we should not forget that. I think we live in an era, as we said, that facts don't matter, and it's mostly ideological positioning. What happened in Egypt is that, yes, I did not believe it because I knew it was wrong, but part of it might be right, but because I was against coup d'etat. It's very hard also at this high rate of flow of information to just have a real-time fact tracking. I think it's now an area ripe to do this, but definitely the state-sponsored in China, I don't know if China is even blocking it totally, the internet, and then even now I heard they are prohibiting even sci-fi posts and sci-fi posts. They don't even want people to imagine.
Yeah, I just want to add something that whether the government, like the Syrian government supporters or like even Trump supporters here, the ones who believe what Trump is saying, I feel like they're just young to care, like when Trump went and he was like, all the Syrian refugees are ISIS. But many people believe him, and so how can you attack that? Like how can you work on those people? So I can only think of awareness workshops or awareness groups. But again, in my personal opinion, those people are just young to care. Sorry. Not optimistic.
Thank you guys for sharing your thoughts and experience. It's really more a question for anyone in the room. But we all, looking around, we all are kind of of the age or older where, we got smartphones at certain, attain a particular maturity. So young people, maybe 18 and under, who are being, growing up with this technology, what's being done or what can we do to reach out and work with them and teach them from a young age how to use these tools properly and what we can do about that. Thank you.
Olivia, you talked about setting those capacities.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really interesting question. Thank you. I think reaching out to, I think it's going to be really difficult, actually. I say this because I'm really dubious of platforms that are created for profit. I think they're inherently apolitical, so it's going to be difficult to reach such a huge swath of youth that have grown up on these platforms. We see this with Facebook and with Twitter and the rise of slacktivism. You think that you're engaged in a political cause just by clicking like on something and to actually engage in a discourse that's constructive is getting more and more difficult on these platforms. And so, as someone who is really interested in bringing encryption to everyone and other digital security practices, I wonder how we can communicate effectively with individuals who have only known platforms that are, or who have really spent a lot of time in environments that are apolitical.
And also individuals who lost the total notion of privacy. So that's another thing. So I think completely depoliticized and the notion of privacy does not exist. So you have to begin from the very beginning why privacy is important.
I'm not a personal expert at all in European privacy law, but I do know that they have like a lot stronger rules regarding people's data. And I would be curious to know if there's anybody here who does, what their stipulations are for people, under like the age of 18 or even under the age of 13 or whatever. And I'm wondering if we could be like proactive, and this is a thing that we would actually have to like legislate rather than like code.
So I'm fielding questions from folks watching on the live stream, and we've got two. Maybe we can wrap up with them. The first, could you speak to the concern that encryption and security culture might risk cutting activists and movements off from potential larger publics?
Great question.
Yeah.
Don't have any great answers.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have any great answers either, but it is something that I had heard in various guises over the past couple of months. That, I mean, there have been people actually like criticizing Tor even for worrying too much about like the human rights aspect of, or no, what was it? It's like, it was worrying like a little bit too much about like the, I guess, I don't even remember at this point what the what the problem was, but and anybody help me out if you understand exactly what it was that I was talking about.
Was it the Tor is government funded or has a history of?
No, although that also is another thing that people debate about as well. But no, it actually had to do with the fact that it was pursuing an identity that might actually like alienate, like the developer community, but also actually kind of, that's what it was. It was that like centering it a little bit too much in like, the human rights narrative, it becomes a human rights tool, and then because it's no longer like apolitical as like an anonymity tool, rather it's like, an activist human rights tool that actually puts people in danger because you're immediately marked as, the human rights defender who is using Tor, if memory serves, and I'm sure the internet will correct me if I'm wrong, but I do recall that is one of the controversies that I'm trying to bring up. I think that those things actually can be mitigated by realizing what a big boat we're all in, and that might be like a little Pollyannish, but like that's what I got, and that's what like gets me out of bed.
Yeah. Cool. I think we'll close it out there because we're running up on time. But I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists for joining us. Thank you for your questions. So I did want to say one more thing. So we're also having a panel here on December 11th, which is next Sunday at 5 p.m. It's the same place, same time next Sunday. And it's going to be an intergenerational panel speaking to what one of the persons that a question spoke to, which is we're going to bring activists and organizers who from all different eras, different movements, to basically just find out, what has been done before, so that way we don't have to recreate the wheel, and we can learn from our elders and use their wisdom to guide us through these dark times. With that said, we're going to go ahead and break for 15 minutes. If you want to stay for the crypto party, please bring out your laptop. In the meantime, use the bathroom, get some food, and we'll be here. So thank you so much.
How